middle of a discussion, Chof Tesam Events. And we are at the first one in the line is Lema Hai Tanai, about two-thirds the page down. Okay. And let's review a little bit. We were discussing yesterday the concept that a father can make his son into a Nazir before he's mature, and a mother cannot. And the source, we had a debate. Either it's an idea of a halacha l'moshe Sinai, it's an oral tradition, or it is the concept of chinuch, educating your child to perform mitzvahs. You're teaching your child how to become a Nazir. Okay, and along the way we saw machlokes. What is the maximum age a father could make his son into a Nazir? So we had a debate. According to Rebbe, it's maturity, physical maturity, and according to Rabbi Yossi, son of Rabbi Yehudah, it is Einas Nadarim. What does Einas Nadarim mean? Typically about 12 years old. So when a child is mature enough to understand the severity of a neder. The source of Einas Nadarim is a concept called mufla hasamach leish. Mufla means hafla. Hafla is to speak basically. And because it says mufla hasamach leish, we say that not only is an adult able to make nadarim, but also a child who's mature, who's old enough, is also able to make nadarim. But let's say a male, it's I think 12 years old, a female 11 years old. And the question though is whether this drasha, this source, is considered a biblical derivation or a rabbinical derivation. And we discussed this yesterday. Now the Gemara goes into an interesting story, and the Gemara wants to know if it'll. Okay, so again, very, very briefly, Mishnah says that a father makes his son a Nazir. Rabbi Yochanan says halacha he ben Nazir. Rish Lakish says it's chinuch, he's just educating him. Okay. Then we have machlokes between Rebbe and Rabbi Yossi. Rebbe says maturity, you can make him into a Nazir until he's mature, physically mature, and Rabbi Yossi says until Einas Nadarim, which is 12 or 11 years old. The Gemara wanted to try to say, it's what we finished with yesterday, was the Gemara was trying to say that the machlokes debate between Rebbe and Rabbi Yossi perhaps aligns with Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish. The Gemara concludes that it's not true, both directions. In other words, both of them could hold, both Rebbe and Rabbi Yossi could hold either like Rabbi Yochanan or like Rish Lakish. And the debate is with regard to mufla hasamach leish, how to understand that. Okay, now we're taking Rebbe and Rabbi Yossi. Again, Rebbe that says physical maturity, Rabbi Yossi that says Einas Nadarim. I'm going to try to align them with another story that happened. What was the story? Let's say that this debate between Rebbe and Rabbi Yossi follows this other debate. The Tanya we learned. There's a story with Reb Chanina shehidiri aviv ben Nazir. His father, so Reb Chanina obviously was a young child. This could very well be Reb Chanina ben Daisa, the famous Reb Chanina ben Daisa. Reb Chanina ben Daisa is famous for a number of things. Most famous for doing miracles, like just because he was bored, he did like these fabulous miracles. He put his there was a viper that kept on biting people, so he put his foot on top of the viper's nest, and the viper died when it bit him. And another Gemara says he was so poor he didn't have any money, so he told his wife to put vinegar into the candlesticks, and the vinegar lit. There's another Gemara, he wanted to give a gift to the temple, but he couldn't afford it. He ended up bringing a rock, and it was some sort of valuable precious gem. And yeah, anyway. The Gemara says Chanina himself was absolutely destitute, but the whole world was the sustenance of the world was in his merits, despite the fact that he was extremely destitute. Okay, so this could very well be the same Reb Chanina. So what happens? The Tanya Ma'aser Reb Chanina shehidir of ben Nazir. His father made him into a Nazir. Ve'heviu lifnei Rabbi Gamliel, and evidently he was pretty close to adulthood. So they brought it to Rabbi Gamliel, and the question is, can his father make him into a Nazir? Now, according to Taisus' version, he actually was over the age of 13. And the debate goes something as follows. So we have two versions of the story. The first version is Rabbi Gamliel was going to inquire to find out if he was physically mature. Rabbi Yossi says no. The version of the story was different. It was he wanted to know how old he was. So Rabbi Yossi holds that it could be he was under the age of 13, but it may be above the age of 12, and nobody really knew, so to speak. Okay. So anyway, so Rav Chanina sees that he's being investigated. They're investigating to see how old he is. So he says very simple. Amar Loi. So he turns to Gamliel and he says to him, "Al Star, you don't have to finish your investigation. Im Kotanani, if I'm a child, then I should be a Nazir because of my father. Im Godlani, but if I'm an adult, then I like to be a Nazir because I want to be a Nazir. It's the problem solved." So Amar Rabbi Gamliel, so Gamliel got up, V'noshke al Rosh, he gave him a kiss on his head. Amar, he says, Muftachani b'zeh shemora halacha b'Yisrael. I'm confident that he will render decisions in Klal Yisrael, amongst the Jewish people. Amar, it said, until he came to the point where he was indeed a great scholar. Okay, 1 second. Okay, so the Gemara says as follows: Bishlam and Rabbi Yehudah. According to Rabbi Yehudah, the Amar that says that his opinion is that you can make your son a Nazir until he reaches a certain age. Amar im katanani aya b'shvil abo. The im godlani aya b'shvil atzmi. Okay. So the Gemara here presumes that when he says he's a godol, meaning he's an adult, it doesn't mean he's mature. It means that he's doesn't mean he's physically mature. He means he's emotionally mature. He's basically einas nedarim. Again, I'll just borrow the article for once. Taisus learns it in a specific way, but maybe the article is a different way of learning it that makes more sense. Hold on. Yeah, those are the same shots. Yeah, okay. Would have rather something else. I said I'm not so happy with that shot, that explanation. Okay, whatever it is. We are on the last line of Chaf Testament Beis. I'll summarize in just a moment. Again, of Chaf Testament Beis.
Okay, Rabbi, first cup of coffee, numbers in English, please.
29b.
29b. Last couple lines on 29b.
Last line.
All right.
Last two lines. Second to last line. Okay. So again, Godel over here means age of emotional maturity. In English, whatever. In our terminology, it would be einas nedarim. So then it makes sense. So the concept of Godel makes sense according to Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Chanina, because the critical question is einas nedarim. So the whole Gemara makes sense. El Rebbe the Amar Yavish Cyrus, according to Rebbe, it says physical maturity, the im Godel ani puberty, the im Godel ani aya b'shvil atzmi. If I am emotionally mature, in other words, I'm einas nedarim, davu akaim. Who cares if you're able to make your own neder? It makes no difference because you're right, because your father can do it anyway, because there's no such thing as einas nedarim as it pertains to your father making you a nazir. So the Gemara says El Amar aha b'shvil avo aha b'shvil atzmi. So the Gemara changes the text slightly, and the Gemara says he didn't say if I'm an adult, meaning if I'm emotionally mature, I'm einas nedarim. What he says is as follows: if I am prior to puberty, then my father made me a nazir. If not, I made myself a nazir. Wait a second. Just very briefly. Yesterday we saw a debate between Rebbe and Rabbi Yossi. Until when can a father until what age can a father make his child into a Nazir? According to Rebbe, the age is physical maturity, puberty. According to Rabbi Yossi Rav Chanina, it's sort of emotional maturity, which is prior to the typical age of physical maturity. It's 12 years old. Obviously, the most common age of physical maturity is going to be 13. So the Gemara is a story. Rav Chanina was around the age of maturity, and his father made him to a Nazir. So they went to Rabbi Gamliel and they wanted to find out, like, how old is he? So he says to him, "Don't worry about it. You know, I'll save you the trouble. If I'm a child, my father made me Nazir, and if I'm an adult, I'm a Nazir because I want to be a Nazir." So what does it mean? I'm an adult. So the Gemara presumes it means Einas Nadarim. In other words, I'm emotionally mature. But that it wouldn't fit with Rebbe's opinion, because according to Rebbe's opinion, we don't care about Einas Nadarim. The only thing we care about is whether you're physically mature or not. So Gemara says, you're right. He didn't mean I'm an adult, meaning I'm Einas Nadarim. He meant to say if I'm an adult, meaning I'm physically mature, then I'm becoming a Nazir of my own volition. And now we're at the top of Lamed Amud Aleph, second line. Okay, so Gemara has now a technical problem. Gemara says, okay, delay. Okay, so let's say, we have the story of Rav Chanina, or sort of an equivalent story, okay, to Rav Chanina. So let's say he was physically mature the day that his father made him a Nazir. So in that case, Khan ben Nazir's delay. We say he's a Nazir. 1 second. Let's say Lebesayf. Let's say he becomes mature after the conclusion of his father's Naziris. So in that case, Khan ben Nazir's Davua. So then his father had a right to make him a Nazir according to Rebbe. Okay. VIC b'mitzay. What happens if it becomes mature in the middle of the Naziris? What happens? 1 second. Okay. So according to Rabbi Yehudah, that a son can make himself into a Nazir once he reaches the age of Nadarim. So then it makes sense. In other words, let's say his father makes him a Nazir before he turns 12 years old. Then within the next 30 days, he turns 12 years old. Because the concept of Einas Nadarim is rabbinical, so therefore the rabbi said, finish your father's Naziris. So it makes sense. He finishes his father's Naziris, no problem. According to Rebbe, that says it's physical maturity. In other words, what happens if you become physically mature during your father's Naziris? What happens? So the Gemara says, according to Rebbe, the truth of the matter is that you'd have to count two periods, your father's time and your own time. 1 second. Okay. Now we go to a Mishnah which we've seen before. The concept of Ish Megalech al Naziris Aviv. So there is a concept we've briefly seen it before, that there is a unique law in Masechtas Nazir that a son is allowed to use his father's sacrifices if they're both Nazirim. It's very limited. It's a very circumscribed halacha. But let's see the specifics. It's only relevant in a very specific scenario. What's the scenario? So the Mishnah actually gives, for some reason, the Mishnah gives a scenario that doesn't work first. Ha'ish megalech al naziris aviv. A son is allowed to use his father's sacrifices. Ve'ena isha megalechas al naziris aviyah. A woman cannot use her father's sacrifices. Remember, a woman is obviously able to be accept nazir and become a nazira. Ketzad, what's an example? Misha aviv nazir. Somebody whose father is a nazir. Vehifresh mois stumen al nazirusay. And he separates unspecified funds to bring karbonis for his nazirus, umeis, and then he dies. And he says, Hareini nazir al menashe agaleach al mois abo. Again, So what was the order? The order is the father became a Nazir, he separates a pile of money, and then he dies. And then the son becomes a Nazir afterwards. So the son of the Nazir, the son of the father, or the son becomes a Nazir after the father's death. But he says, I'm becoming a Nazir on condition I can use my father's stack of money to buy the karbanos. Rabbi Yosi says, Harei el yiplu l'nedafa. This money goes to Eilis Kaitz and Mizbeach, it goes to Nedavas, to gifts. It cannot be served. Ein zeh megalech nizir saviv. He cannot use it to buy his own sacrifices. So what is a scenario where the son is able to use his father's karbanos? Misha hayahuv of Nazirim. Him and his father were both a Nazir at the same time. V'hifrish of karban, v'hifrish of ma'astumin. And his father separates a pile of money to buy karbanos. Then is Yerusay, who makes, and then the father dies. Hareu zehu shemigalech al Nazir's aviv. The son is allowed to use it. Now, if you notice, you read the Mishnah closely, you notice that this is the opinion of Rabbi Yosi. Is this opinion universally accepted or not? We'll get to that shortly. Okay. So obviously the question is, my timer, what's the reason of this? And anyone wants to guess? Why? Where is the source of the law that you can make your son into a Nazir? Any guesses? It's pretty easy. It's very similar to the last two Mishnayos. Amar v'yechanan halacha hi b'Nazir. It's a tradition. A lot of traditions. Yeah. And it has sort of a biblical status. Okay, so the Gemara says Pshita. 1 second. The Gemara says the fact that a daughter, so the Gemara's question is as follows. Pshita, Ma'ala Memra, to Ben Yerush Av Baslai. The Mishnah says that a daughter is not able to bring her father's sacrifices. So the Gemara asks, what do you mean? A daughter can't bring her father's sacrifices? Obviously, because she doesn't own it. Because a daughter does not inherit her father. It's only a son that inherits his father. Ma'ala Memra, to Ben Yerush Av, that a son inherits his father, Baslai. Obviously, that's the case. So the Gemara says no. There are scenarios that a daughter inherits, and that is if there are no sons. So Leitzricha Delesle Alabas, he only has a daughter. Ma'adim, I would think Yarshin Gemir law. You have to specifically be. Anyone who inherits is part of this halacha l'moshe Sinai. Both the son and the daughter. Yarshin Gemir law, Kamash Malan halacha. So part of the tradition is that no, it's not an inheritor. It is a son, specifically. Okay. Now we get to an interesting, obviously, the clarifying Gemara.
It's saying that if there's no son, okay, then the daughter would...
So in other words, the Mishnah says only a son can bring his father's karbanos, his father's stack of money, the daughter not. Question is, obviously, daughter can't, because daughter doesn't own the stack of money. So Gemara says, no, we could be even talking about a scenario where the daughter does, because there's only one daughter, or there's more daughters, but there are only daughters. There are no sons. In that case, the daughter would inherit the money. And the Mishnah is still telling us that it's specifically a law to sons and not to daughters.
So it's hard to...
It's a tradition. It's a tradition. It's a tradition. It's there's in Talmud there's an expression. It's used like 2 or 3 times, but it's often quoted by Talmudical scholars. It was a debate between 2 scholars, and one of them basically says to the other one, "You're bringing no sources to support your opinion." So he says, "Im halacha." If you say it's a tradition, nekabel, then I'm forced to accept it because I can't argue with you logically. But im ladin, if you mean to prove it logically, yes, tshuva, then I can respond to you. So if it's halacha and a kabel, there's nothing that's the tradition. That's it. There's no, it's not exactly. Okay. Pligi Rabbanan Alad Rabbi Yosi Alai Pligi. So again, we had this debate. We had in our Mishnah, our Mishnah had 2 scenarios. Scenario 1 was where the son became a Nazir after the father died. And scenario number 2 is where the father and the son were Nazirim simultaneously. The father sets aside a stack of money, passes away, and the son wants to know if he can use that stack of money. So in the first scenario, the scenario where the son becomes a Nazir after the father, we say he can't use the money. And when they're not Nazirim simultaneously, we say he could use the money. And this is the opinion of Rabbi Yossi. Okay, obviously the question is this just the opinion of Rabbi Yossi? Or is this sort of a debate? Or in other words, is Rabbi Yossi expressing what everybody holds? Or is this a question? Is it a question? Are there those that disagree with the opinion of Rabbi Yossi? And then we have to understand itself, on the question itself, what exactly are they disagreeing with Rabbi Yossi? Again, there's 2 scenarios. Scenario number 1 is that the son became Nazir after the father passes away. Do they hold that in that scenario the son could bring the karbanos? And scenario number 2 is where the son and the father were Nazirim at the same time, and then the father passed away. What about that scenario? Do they hold that scenario? We're saying that the son could bring the karbanos. Maybe they disagree with that in that scenario.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe they hold the opposite, or maybe they agree in one scenario and disagree in the other scenario. That's roughly speaking the Gemara's question. Hey, borrow the article for a moment.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, no, it's just it's minor inconsistency. Okay, whatever. The article does not address it. Okay, anyway, Tashma. Okay, so Ibalu, plea your Rabban Allah, I like plea. Do the rabbis disagree or not? Imtim Salam or plea, Aresha Seifa. Do they disagree in the first part of the Mishnah where he became a Nazir after his father died, or a Seifa on the end where he was a Nazir together with his father? Tashma, let's examine this. Okay, what's interesting here is the Gemara brings a brisa that has an entirely different version of Rabbi Yossi.
Oh.
And I was looking for articles to comment on that, but they don't. Again, Rabbi Yossi in the Mishnah says that you become a Nazir after your father, then after your father died, Eina Migalech al Nazir Saviv. You're a Nazir at the same time, Migalech al Nazir Saviv. You're able to bring it. Now we get a different version of Rabbi Yossi. Kate said, what does it mean that that a person could use his father's karbanos? Mishayu Aviv Nazir, somebody whose father was a Nazir. V'hifrish karban. I'm sorry. Behifish of him Moislan is Yerusay, and his father separated a pile of money. Umeis and he dies. So he becomes a Nazir after his father dies. This is an example of somebody who becomes a Nazir who can use his father's money. And let's say him and his father were Nazirim simultaneously. And his father separated money and then died. That money cannot be used to bring the karbanos. This is the opinion of Rabbi Yosi, which is the opposite version of what we learned in the Mishnah. 1 second.
That's what gets confusing.
Yeah. There might be other variations here.
Yeah.
There are other variations that correct it. Yeah, okay, 1 second, hold on. Yeah, okay. Anyway, seems a different version of Rabbi Yosi. Rabbi Eliezer, okay, so the opinion of Rabbi Yosi here is the opposite of Rabbi Yosi in the Mishnah. Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Yehudah Amru. Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Yehudah says, Zeu shemigaleach amois aviv. The second scenario is also an example where you can bring the scenario where him and his father are Nazir at the same time, or is also an example where you can use your father's carbon. Okay, what do we see here from the Mishnah? We see that if they disagree in the first part. That the rabbi, there is another opinion that holds that even in a scenario where the father dies and then the son becomes a Nazir, you can still bring the father's karbanos. Okay. So now the Gemara has a bunch of questions, and all these questions are sort of linked. The Gemara is trying to figure out the exact parameters of this, of when you're able to bring the carbon. And that takes us to the end, until the end today. Boy Rava. Sorry, Boy Rabba. Rabba had the following question. Yesh shnei banim nazirim. If he has two sons that are Nazir, mahu, what's the law? Helchas Gemira law called the kodem migaleach. Do we say that whoever is first to bring the karbonos takes the pile of money? Or is it considered an inheritance? Upal gahava, and they split it equally. Next question. Boy Rava, another question. Bechor poshet. So the concept is that a bechor gets a double portion. Almost all the assets, with the exception of specific types of assets. Okay, whatever that is. Let's say the bechor. Okay, so you have a bechor who gets a double portion and a regular one and a regular child. What's the story? Do you say that it's halacha l'moshe Sinai and therefore it's split 50-50? Or do you say no? It's a Yerusha. It's an inheritance. Just like he inherits a double portion, right? 2/3 of the assets. So too, he gets 2/3 of his father's money for karbonos. Let's say you'll say that it actually depends on inheritance. Well, he takes as much as he deserves. In other words, if he's a bechor, he gets 2/3. Does it make a difference as follows? Now, there's two ways it can make a difference here. When the father sets aside a stack of money to buy karbanos, does he mean, did he actually sanctify the money by saying this is money, sacrificial money? Or did he say that I'm setting aside, this is the money I'm going to use for carbon? But he didn't actually sanctify it. Is there a difference? In other words, in the case where he didn't sanctify it, it's chulin. Obviously, it's going to be an inheritance. But in the case where it's sanctified, maybe it's sanctified money, so it doesn't even go into the inheritance. It's sort of not part of the inheritance because it doesn't belong to him in some sense, some real sense. Okay. What happens if him and his father are different types of Nazirim? Aviv Nazir Olam. His father is a permanent Nazir who's trying to cut his hair. So he brings karbanis and he's allowed to cut his hair. Right? We learned about 3 types of permanent Naziris. There's a Nazir Olam, a Nazir Shimshin, and a Nazir Lit Olam. A Nazir Olam is allowed to cut his hair once every 30 days. A Nazir Shimshin is allowed to become Tameh. And a Nazir Lit Olam is a regular Nazir with regular restrictions of Nazir forever. So what happens if his father is a Nazir Olam? He's allowed to cut his hair if he brings karbanis. But who Nazir Stam? He's a regular Nazir. Is he allowed to use his father's money? What happens the opposite? Aviv Nazir Stam. His father was a 30-day Nazir. But who Nazir Olam? And he's a permanent Nazir. What's the story? Ki Gemira and Hilchasa Stam Naziris. Did we accept the tradition by regular Naziris? Idilma Loishna. It doesn't make a difference what type of Naziris. The imtim tzalai marhacha idividin is. Okay. And presumably until now we had the understanding that both his father and his son, and the father and the son, were both tahirim. They were both ending their nazirus. What happens? By Rav Ashi, of Nazir Tameh, who Nazir Tar. His father became Tameh and would have brought his karbanis to rectify his tumah. His son, on the other hand, kept a Nazir and he kept a full nazirus. He's tahar. He wants to bring the karbanis for nazirus of tahara to end regular nazirus, or the opposite of Nazir Tar, who Nazir Tameh. His father remained pure. He became Tameh. What's the story? Gemara concludes, take or let it stand. Okay, so just a brief summary. We had a machlokes between. We learned in the Mishnah, Rabbi Yossi differentiate. We learned in the Mishnah the concept that somebody can use his father as nazirus. Rabbi Yossi says it's limited to where him and his father were nazir simultaneously, and not where his father was a nazir first, and then died, and then he became a nazir. Okay, we learned the source was halacha ibn nazir. This idea that a son can use his father as nazirus is a halacha l'maisha Sinai. It's a tradition. We said the rabbis disagree. They hold that in the first scenario where the son dies after the father, where the son becomes a nazir after the father dies, also in that scenario he can use his father's karbanis. Then we had a bunch of questions trying to understand: is it inheritance, or is it a straight halacha? Do they have to be the same type of nazir, and do they both have to be tar, as opposed to one being tahar and one being tamei? That concludes the parak. Okay. Great day.